Hello there and welcome to my channel. This is Ingawi Game. I started this channel because I'm Christian and I like gaming. Those are literally the two biggest things in my life. Well, other than my girlfriend, but anyway. I'm probably talking to the void as I literally don't know anyone that might watch this. But I'm reviewing a game that I found interesting. Okay, mostly I just wanted to start a channel and talk about video games. The game I'm talking about today is Fatal Fury. I'm going to give you a quick history about my experience with the game. Now, despite growing up in the era where most kids my age had PlayStation 3s, or in my teenage years, PlayStation 4s, I had a Sega Genesis. Primarily because my parents weren't exactly the biggest on my gaming. Heck, my father, really not a big fan of games. My mom was pretty much neutral about the whole thing. But since none of them ever bought me a console until I was way older, I got a DS, and later on a 3DS in like 2018. I had a Sega Genesis with a few cartridges, including a Sonic collection, Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures, Road Rash 2. However, I wouldn't get my taste in Fatal Fury at this point. I would later buy one of those from a nephew of mine for $40. Would buy one of those at Genesis consoles that played cartridges, but also had 40 Sega Genesis games included, including all the Mortal Kombats, most of the Sonic games. I never had Sonic Knuckles 3. Phantasy Star, which is personally one of my favorites. Eternal Champions, Golden Axe, the like. But this still would not be where I got my start with Fatal Fury. It wouldn't be till years later when I would buy a handheld Genesis player and it had Fatal Fury 1 and 2 installed on it. Now, I was far older at the time and mostly bought the console to play Phantasy Star and Sonic. Unfortunately, the console didn't have save states, which was a bummer. But I loved fighting games, so I ended up picking up Fatal Fury and immediately getting my butt kicked. This game was interesting at the very least, as it was far more story-based than our fighting games, which I love story. But the Genesis port on that emulator console just kicked my butt into oblivion. But now, years later, I am an adult, make my own video game consoles, not consoles, sorry, games, and found this game, Fatal Fury 1, at a direct arcade port for the computer for $9 in the Microsoft Store. So I decided to buy it and try to beat it, which I did. And I decided, well, why the heck not? I could just make a video talking about this game and maybe someone will listen to it. So without further ado, here's my review of Fatal Fury.
Okay, for
1.
those
For the PC.
who are not in the know, Fatal Fury is a legendary fighting game developed by SNK. I'll be reviewing the PC port of this game, which is available on the Microsoft Store. But first, let's talk about its development and why it's so special. Fatal Fury was developed by SNK and released in 1991 for the Neo Geo system. The mastermind behind this game was Takesha Nishinomiya, He's Japanese, okay? I have a hard time saying Japanese names. I'll put it up right here so you can read it. Who had previously worked on the original Street Fighter at Capcom. Imagine Capcom's surprise when Nishishima jumped ship to SNK and created a game that would become one of their biggest rivals. Yeah, I bet Capcom wasn't too thrilled about that. The big draw to this game was its story-based gameplay, which I thought was pretty cool when I played this originally as well. Nishishima envisioned Fatal Fury as more than just a fighting game. He wanted to create a game with a compelling story and rich character development, which was quite unique at the time. Most fighting games focused solely on combat, but Fatal Fury introduced players to the Bogard brothers, Terry and Andy, in their quest to avenge their father's death at the hands of the crime lord Geese Howard. This narrative added a depth of engagement for players. Heck, before the game even came out, there was a whole animated movie just to help set up the story to this game. And I'm pretty sure you can find it on YouTube pretty easily. That's how I watched it. It's only like 40 minutes long, and it's a really good anime. Basically retelling the events of the game. Though, I was just, spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, Geese doesn't die by getting thrown off Geese Tower. Sorry. It disappointed me quite a bit when I watched it. But other than that, it's a fairly good adaptation. As for its success in the arcade, which the PC port is based off, might I add, when Fatal Fury hit the arcades, it was an instant hit. The innovative two-plane fighting system, which I'll get into more later, where characters can move between the foreground and background to dodge attacks. It set it apart from other games as well, and became a favorite among arcade goers, and solidified SNK's reputation in the fighting game genre. It even got a couple home ports, including the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, and until I did research this video, apparently it got one to the Sharp X68000? I'm not even sure how I pronounce it. I'll put this up here again. I have no idea what this console is, so if any of you own one and know what it is, leave in the comments. Each port had its own quirks, but they all tied to the capture the essence of the arcade experience, which most 16-bit consoles couldn't do that, I'm sorry. But I actually prefer the 16-bit counterparts to many games. I mean, Mortal Kombat 1, my favorite version of the game is the Genesis version. Mostly because of that good old-fashioned twang the Genesis is known for. But enough of that. Let's dive into the gameplay and see how well this game holds up today. Alright, now let's dive into my favorite part of any video game, the story. As I've probably mentioned multiple times in this video, Fatal Fury is no slouch when it comes to its storytelling. So here's the setup. Jeff Bogart adopted two sons, Andy and Terry. From where? Who knows? Tragically, he was murdered by Geese Howard. We'll get into the reasons behind this in later videos. Now, nothing was done about Jeff Bogart's death because Geese Howard basically owned Southtown, which is a stand-in for Miami, Florida. For 10 years, Terry and Andy trained. Andy trained under the wise sensei in Japan, while Terry, well, I'm not exactly sure what he did. From my understanding, he just wandered around and fought random people. Classic Terry, right? I guess he was on a world tour of street brawls. The game kicks off after this 10-year period, where both brothers return to Southtown. Andy brings along his best friend, Joe Higashi, a kickboxing champion from Japan, who spent most of his time training in Thailand. You start up the game, get a quick prompt showing you the basic controls. If you look in the manual, which is available digitally should you buy the PC port, cannot recommend this port enough if you intend to play this game, you'll get instructions on how to do one character's special attack, or the character's one special attack. You will get shown how to do more as you play through the game, which gives it a semblance of progression. And if you beat the game before or want to look it up online, these other special attacks still work at the start. But just a little tidbit you should probably know. You can pick between 4 combatants at the start, but after you pick your first combatant, you'll fight them in some random semblance of order, I guess. In between each battle, Geese will talk to his henchmen, kind of like little cutscenes. At first, he'll just take a small interest in you. Then, he'll ask one of his henchmen to get information about you. Eventually, he'll realize who you are. At least if you're playing as Terry like I was, and I always do, Terry's the best. He'll discover you're Jeff Bogart's son, and send his henchmen after you. Raiden, this heavyweight, fat, boxing wrestling dude, who also likes spit tobacco. He's a real pain in the butt to fight. I could only ever beat him by spamming the power wave. Hey, if it works, right? After you beat him, you fight Billy Kane and become the champion. But this celebration is extremely short-lived, because Geese then has his henchmen grab you and take you to the top of his tower, where the true final boss begins. And let me tell you, Geese Howard is a fighting game boss to the T. If you don't understand your character's special moves and basic mechanics of the game down pat, he will mop the floor with you and throw you off his tower to your death. to add insult to injury. But if you master these and beat them, which is extremely satisfying to do, you will throw him off the tower, and he will presumably fall to his death. Don't ask me why I said presumably. We'll get to that in my Fatal Fury 3 video. But here, he presumably dies in the hospital a few hours later. Well, I guess Geese really took the phrase taking the plunge a bit too literally. You then get a quick ending sequence saying this is just the prologue, which is really nice. And as you weird script thing. But it's really nice, because you get the understanding that this is just the start of an amazing trilogy of games.
Next, we should probably get to the sound design and music. I'm just gonna play a few scenes from the game and fights, as nothing about sound design or music stood out for me. It's just a old arcade fighting game. It's not to anything personal with the game. It's not terrible. It's just not what I would generally listen to in my own time.
Raiden. Round 1.
Now for playable characters. First we have Joe Higashi, who is a rushdown. Basically, what's the best way to put this? A rushdown in fighting games, you don't know what a fighting game rushdown is basically a character who just, they rush down their opponents. They're very fast and may not do a lot of damage, but they have high combo potential. So here's a fight with him. I don't generally use him, but these are all the special moves I could pull off. So I might have missed a few. Next, we got my main man, the person I literally always play as, Terry Bogard. He is the all-rounder archetype, meaning jack of all trades, master of none. Which is, call me basic, what I always go with in my fighting games. I'll let the footage speak for itself.
Now, for the last character on our list, yes, there are only 3 playable characters. I don't really know what to think of him. I don't know what archetype he's under, and I can't really get a definitive answer online. But Andy Bogard, who, you know what?
Looking at this goofy speed thing, I'm going to call him the Sonic the Hedgehog archetype. Yes, you heard me right. He's a lot like Sonic in more ways than just speed. We will get into that in our Fatal Fury 2 video. But the only moves I can really pull off with him are his weird spin thing, or spin dash. Calling it spin dash probably wouldn't be a good word. What would be a great thing to call it in a goofy Japanese name? Oh, I know. Dash. And it's a cool projectile here, which is pretty neat. From here on, I'll let the footage speak for itself. Now, let's end this off by talking about the replay value, bonus content, and whether Fatal Fury is worth your money. As far as content goes, there's the story mode, as you saw, where you can play as 3 characters. Each one has slightly different dialogue, but once you master the main mechanics, you can beat the game in about 20 minutes. But don't expect to do this on your first go, especially if you're new to fighting games or the Fatal Fury series in general. It's safe to say you'll spend a good amount of time just getting the grips to the controls and mastering them, so you can take on Geese Howard and beat the game. Other than the main story, there's a multiplayer mode, which basically boils down to a traditional 2-player fighting game where you can beat the tar out of each other. However, you can play as all the other characters, and in some of the console versions, you can even play as Geese Howard. If you prompt multiplayer in the middle of the game, you two can team up on an opponent. So if you're having a hard time, just get your little brother or wife to pick up the controller and you can take on this guy on 2-on-1. Talk about family bonding. And lastly, there's a little arm wrestling mini game that you can play throughout the story. It's not much. You just tap the A button to beat this guy at arm wrestling. After each of these mini games, you get a prompt showing you how to do the next special move. But it shows up whether you win the mini game or not, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. And finally, was it worth your money? Well, on the Microsoft Store, I bought this game for $9.99. Because that really is up to you. I didn't feel like my money was wasted. I had a lot of fun playing this game. And some might want a little more out of their fighting games. And some later games in this series are way better. 2 and 3 are phenomenal. We'll be looking at those soon. But if you see this game on sale, it's definitely worth picking up. So if I had to rank it out of 1 out of 10, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. The soundtrack and sound design were okay, but not too impressive, at least in my opinion. The game was phenomenal. All 3 characters are well-rounded and fun to play as, even though I personally prefer Terry and play him the most. The story was better than average. I think the anime did a better job at telling it. And for an early 90s fighting game, it did a pretty good job. And if you want to go through the game multiple times, it's definitely worth replaying. It has some decent dialogue changes, depending on who you play as. Let me know if you agree with my ranking in the comments below. Please keep in mind this is not my personal opinion. This is just my personal opinion, so don't take too much offense to this. Also, I am literally using a flip phone to record all this footage, and I have never recorded a YouTube video before other than some Let's Plays and guides before, which nobody watched. And if there's anything I can improve, though, for the next video, let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe. One more thing I should mention. Remember how earlier I said Andy was like Sonic? Well, by our next review, we're going to see that Andy has a lot more in common with Sonic than you might think. Let's just say there's a certain someone who chases him around with the same enthusiasm that a certain pink hedgehog has for our blue speedster. She's got some jiggle physics to go along with it. Stay tuned for that.